The 2015 American football schedule was officially released this morning. It's an historic year for the conference as there will be new East and West divisions to eventually crown a champion in the inaugural conference championship game. The schedule features some outstanding conference matchups as well as a challenging lineup of out-of-league games. In fact, 7 of the top 25 teams in last year's AP poll are on the slate as American teams continue to schedule challenging non-conference games. The full schedule is available at theamerican.org, but let's take a look at some of the big games. We begin with UCF, which visits Cincinnati Halloween night in a matchup of 2 of the 3 2014 conference champions. In the second to last game of the season, UCF will host East Carolina in a rematch of one of the most exciting games of last year. We all remember the Hail Mary Justin Holman to Brashad Perriman to win it in Greenville and claim a share of the conference crown. Their non-conference slate is no joke either. They'll head to Stanford and South Carolina in the beginning of the year. Cincinnati will open up conference play in newly renovated Nippert Stadium the second week of the season against Temple. They'll be back at Nippert 2 weeks later with back-to-back primetime games on ESPN against Memphis and Miami of Florida before a bye week and a trip to BYU. They'll have 5 consecutive weeks of conference games before closing out the season at East Carolina, another game that came down to the final seconds last season. Speaking of the Pirates, they have a challenging year coming up as well. Towson, Florida, Navy, and Virginia Tech kick off the fall for the purple and gold. They then head to BYU, host a rematch against Temple, and close out the season against UCF and Cincinnati. A possible year of redemption for the Pirates after a few heartbreakers in the second half of last season. They'll face 4 of the 5 teams that beat them last year. Temple will look to build on a big turnaround season from last year. Their 6 wins tripled their win total from 2013. They'll open up with a big one in Philly against Penn State. Then we'll face a tough stretch later in the season with consecutive games against UCF, ECU, and Notre Dame. In the second to last game of the year, they'll host the defending champs Memphis. UConn will look to continue rebuilding under second-year head coach Bob Diaco. The Huskies face a season filled with tests, with games off the bat against Army, Missouri, Navy, BYU, and UCF. It doesn't get any easier in the second half of the season, with games against Cincinnati, East Carolina, and Houston. USF will have a big test in the second game of the season up the road at Florida State. The Bulls are 1-1 all-time against the Noles. Their one win came at FSU in 2009. They continue a challenging stretch with games against Maryland, Memphis, and Syracuse. The final 2 games of the season will be against the defending co-champions, Cincinnati and UCF. The war on I-4 with the Knights quickly becoming a late-season tradition, playing on the Friday after Thanksgiving for the 3rd year in a row. That sums up the marquee events from the East. Now let's take a look at the West. Memphis headlines the Western Division after winning a share of the league title in 2014. They'll take on fellow champion Cincinnati in the first conference game of the season, September 24th in a primetime Thursday game on ESPN. The Tigers also have a rematch 3 weeks later against Ole Miss after losing a close one in Oxford last fall. A tough stretch towards the end of the season that includes Navy, Houston, and Temple should be a good test for the Tigers. For Houston, it will be a defining year as they welcome Tom Herman to the Cougar family. Herman will have a national championship ring from last year at Ohio State on his finger as they open up the season at home against Tennessee Tech and then head on the road to Louisville. The second half of the season could be the most challenging part of their schedule, with games against UCF, Vandy, Cincinnati, Memphis, and closing out the year with Navy. Just down the road, SMU will have a new head man in charge as well. Former Clemson offensive coordinator Chad Morris will be tested out of the gates with games against Baylor, North Texas, TCU, ECU, and Houston. It doesn't get any easier for the Mustangs as they close out the year with Temple, Navy, and Memphis. Tulane will look to come out on the other side of some close losses from last year. The Green Wave played tough against ranked teams Duke and Georgia Tech, and they'll have the chance to do so again in the first 2 weeks of the season. The middle of the year will be what defines this up-and-coming Tulane team. Games against UCF, Temple, Houston, Navy, and Memphis will be must-wins for a chance to win the West. The third team in the West Division with a new head coach is the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. Former Baylor offensive coordinator Philip Montgomery will look to turn the blue and gold around this season. A tough conference schedule highlights Tulsa's season with games against the 3 defending conference champs. They'll also have to take on Houston, ECU, and Navy. Speaking of Navy, the Midshipmen joined the American in 2015. Their first league game comes September 19th when they host East Carolina and their pass-happy offense. Quite a contrast from the Middies' triple option attack. Out of conference, the Midshipmen continue their rivalry with Notre Dame and the battle for the Commander-in-Chief trophy with Air Force and Army. It should be another exciting season both in and out of conference. And then, of course, an historic season with the first ever American Conference Championship game, played December 5th, televised nationally on either ESPN or ABC. For the full game schedule and press release, head to theamerican.org. Football will be back before we know it. For the American Digital Network, I'm Haley Outen.